Former Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick is our guest this morning. Let's go on the record. A late leap into the presidential race came up well short, but Deval Patrick has his eyes on the long game, where he sees the Democratic Party in the critical moments before the November election and how the pandemic has changed politics as we know it. Let's go on the record.
From WCVB Channel 5, the inside word from Washington to Beacon Hill. Today's newsmakers are going on the record.
Welcome to OTR on this Sunday morning. I'm Ed Harding, along with News Center 5's political reporter Janet Wu. This summer is like no other. It's beginning to slip away already because we're in August. We do continue to follow all social distancing protocols here in our studio in Needham. We're using every bit of our large space. And our guest this morning joins us via Zoom from his home in the Berkshires. Former Governor Deval Patrick served 2 terms as governor of the Commonwealth. Great to have you with us, sir. The first person of color to hold the state's highest office. He remains actively involved in Democratic politics, and it is a pleasure to welcome him back to our show again. Great to see you, Governor. You look great.
Great to see you both from this distance. Closer the next time, I hope.
We certainly hope so. We first of all, well, thank you again for being on the show. We've got a lot of national questions we want to ask you, but let's start with one local question that's hard to ignore. You've been the governor here. As you look at the numbers here in Massachusetts, do you think schools should reopen to at least some in-person classes, or should they remain all remote for the fall?
It's so hard, Janet, because there's so little that we really understand about COVID-19. It keeps changing. We've had so little consistent guidelines and guidance at the national level. I think at the state level, the team seems to be adapting just as fast and as well as they can. And this is obviously their decision. We have a grandson who is aching to get back to school and be with his friends, and a mother and other parents who are understandably cautious about that. So I think there are ways of thinking about how especially younger children can be together in safe pods where their own habits of distancing and their families' habits of care can be relied on is the kind of thing I start to think about, but I don't pretend to have a grasp of all of the factors that bear on this. I just have the perspective of a 7-year-old who is aching to get back into class.
Well, as a grandparent, you don't have final say, but what's your advice to your children about sending your grandson back to school?
Well, first of all, they are waiting for guidance from the schools, and the schools are struggling, as you can imagine. They are, in our daughter's case, they have the notion of trying to do. You've heard these models, a sort of staggered week where some kids come in for certain days and other kids come in for the other days. I've heard of folks talking about different times of day. Some kids get the mornings and others the afternoons. That kind of thing. And of course, there are implications for working moms and dads as well, in terms of their ability to be supported through this. I think we're all going to have to stay flexible. We're all going to have to be patient. Everyone is thinking about the safety of the students and their families first, and that seems to me to be appropriate. And beyond that, I just don't have an answer.
Well, to that point, Governor, do the current numbers call for rolling back of some of the reopening? Maybe go from phase 3 back to phase 2. What do you think?
I don't really know. I mean, it's, as I said, the behaviors of people around the country have varied so widely because we've had so little national guidance. I mean, it's an outrage to me when I think about nearly 5 million Americans positive with the virus today. 160,000 we have lost to the virus, and a president who, if we'd been attacked at Pearl Harbor, can you imagine a president calling and saying to the governor of Hawaii, good luck and call us if you need us? I mean, it's just ridiculous that there's been no national and effective engagement and coordination. And I think all communities are suffering from this.
Do you think that Massachusetts should be tougher on some of the larger crowds? I'm sure you've seen the video and the pictures of large numbers of people, like at beaches and parks, being very close together. Should there be penalties enforced instead of simply scolding people?
Well, I think there are penalties, or at least there are for travelers. This is can you imagine? I never would have imagined a pandemic being politicized in the way this one has been. This is a public health emergency, and it's challenging for everybody. Indeed, it has exposed not just our need to be with other people, but so much of the unfinished business of Massachusetts and of America. The health disparities, the impact on people without resources, the way we now talk of folks as essential, whom we have rarely treated or paid as if they are essential. I think it is causing us a really important reckoning on a whole bunch of levels, including the question of what it means to be American and what responsibility that calls on from each of us to each other.
But I'm wondering, Governor, do you think there should be something more than, like Governor Baker has said, this is, we're not going to enforce it. This is you have to enforce yourself. This is your own behavior. Should there be something stronger than that? I mean, should there be?
It's hard to think of asking our law enforcement folks to go ticket people because they're too close together at a party. But there ought to be some regular drumbeat of information and encouragement and admonition about how important this is. You remember when we had the attacks at the marathon, we asked people to shelter in place at the end of that week. Do you remember? And
right.
When we had identified the location of the perpetrators, it wasn't in order. People did it. Not everybody, but on the whole, people did it because it wasn't extended. They didn't know that at the time, and because they trusted that we were giving them information around which they could plan their lives. And I think one of the hard parts of this, and one of the differences of this, is that we rarely get at the national level consistent information that enables us to plan our behaviors.
I think what we're building toward is how would you assess how Governor Baker has handled the pandemic, and here in Massachusetts, and as you mentioned, it's been a state-by-state approach, but how do you think the governor's handled it?
I think he's got a really, really hard task. It felt a little slow to get going, but once he got going, I think he's been doing really well. I say that having said it's a really hard task, because this is not the kind of thing that lends itself to state boundaries. Viruses don't recognize state boundaries. They don't recognize a party, for that matter. And so I think from what I can tell and from what I read and see, the governor and his whole team have been trying to adapt to changes in circumstances and turn changes in information as we get it.
Governor, let's talk a little bit about justice reform. Protests continue, but they're not in the same large numbers they once were. Candidates are running on these issues across the country. But
Yes.
My question to you is, do you think it's going to usurp the pandemic as the top issue for people as they vote this fall?
In a way they're related, Janet, but I will say that the issues around criminal justice and the sort of behavior of police toward Black people, the behavior of police toward some of the protesters, which have been overwhelmingly peaceful, is alarming. It's not new. But the fact that we haven't had the kind of distractions we often do when these things come up, I think has caused people to really focus in a sustained and I think incredibly important way.
So you're saying in a way that the pandemic has forced us to focus in on this?
Yes. In the same disparities or kinds of disparities I talked about earlier in terms of economic conditions, the ability of people to access various forms of relief, to turn to others for support or not. Much of these disparities have the same roots at the bottom of the issues around police, excessive use of police force. Doesn't mean all police are bad. Doesn't mean policing doesn't have its place. But it does mean, again, we have some unfinished business and a racial reckoning that is a big part of it, which I think is enormously important. In election, the character of the candidates is an issue. Right now, it's the character of the country. And I said that and believed that before the pandemic, before George Floyd's videotaped lynching. In some ways, I think we're all facing similar kinds of understandings about the scope and significance of what it is we're voting on now and what it is we have to do when we have new leadership.
So my question, of course, I have to ask you, any interest in becoming Attorney General in a Biden administration?
One thing at a time. One thing at a time.
Governor DeMoss.
I'm working. No, quite seriously, I'm working really, really hard to help Biden win. To help a number of through an initiative we launched called Together Fund to help a number of Democratic candidates for the Senate and for the House, many of whom are running in places where Democrats have not competed or haven't competed successfully for a long time. There's a terrific group of people who really do understand how important it is for us to restore a sense of national community, that we have a stake in each other, and that we have some big, hard questions that need to be called, and some big opportunities to do right by more people.
Governor, you answered the question about Attorney General artfully.